Sir, please. Don't say anything.
The moment Robert Harrison walked through his own front door, a housekeeper's trembling hand covered his mouth, eyes wild with terror, whispering words that would shatter his world. "Sir, please, they can't know you're here. Your wife, what she's doing to your children right now." He stood frozen, roses dropping from his grip, heart hammering as muffled crying echoed from somewhere deep inside his mansion. This wasn't the home he'd left that morning. This was something darker, something he'd been blind to for far too long. And the truth that was about to surface would either destroy him or set him free. There was no middle ground anymore. Robert Harrison had built an empire from nothing, real estate developments across 3 states, investments that made other men jealous, a life most people only dreamed about. But standing in that marble-floored hallway at 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, none of it mattered. Anna Martinez, his housekeeper for 3 years, had never looked at him like this before. Like she'd just witnessed a crime and didn't. Tino, if reporting it would get her killed or just fired. Her uniform was pressed and perfect as always, but her hands shook violently as she pulled him behind the ornate archway, hiding them both from whatever was happening in the East Wing living room. "Mr. Harrison, I'm begging you," she whispered, her accent thick with emotion. "Don't let her hear you. She only does this when you're gone, and if she knows you saw—" Her voice cracked, tears streaming down her weathered face. Robert felt his legs weaken. "Does what?" The question burned in his throat, but some part of him, the part that had survived boardroom battles and hostile takeovers, knew that asking it out loud might break whatever fragile protection Anna was offering him right now. The sounds coming from the living room weren't loud, but they cut through the silence like shattered glass. Children's voices, his children's voices, but wrong somehow. Strained and frightened in a way that made his stomach turn. Michael, Sarah, and Tommy were in there, and they weren't laughing. They weren't playing. They were performing like trained animals desperate to avoid punishment. Anna's grip on his arm tightened. "Since Mrs. Margaret came into their lives 2 years ago, sir, things changed. At first it was small, sharp words when you weren't around, taking away privileges for tiny mistakes. But after the first 6 months," she swallowed hard, struggling to continue. "After 6 months, she stopped pretending. The children learned not to tell you because she threatened them, said she'd send them away where you'd never find them, said you'd believe her over them because adults always stick together." Robert felt bile rise in his throat. 2 years. He'd been married to Margaret for 2 years, thinking she was the answer to his children's grief after losing their mother to cancer. She'd seemed perfect, elegant, educated, patient with the kids during the courtship. She'd even cried at the wedding, talking about how honored she was to become their new mother. But standing there, hidden in his own home like a thief, Robert realized he'd never actually watched her with them when she thought no one important was looking. He'd seen what he wanted to see, believed what was convenient to believe, and now his children had paid the price for his willful blindness. Anna pulled out her phone with shaking hands, scrolling quickly to a video file she'd hidden in a locked folder. "I recorded this yesterday, sir. I was going to show you tomorrow morning before you left for work, but—" She pressed play, and Robert's world collapsed. There on the small screen was Margaret, beautiful, composed Margaret, standing over Tommy, his youngest, screaming words no child should ever hear. "You're worthless, just like your dead mother. She died to get away from you. Did you know that? Your father only keeps you around out of guilt." Tommy was sobbing, trying to apologize for spilling juice on the carpet while Margaret grabbed his arm hard enough to leave marks. Michael and Sarah stood frozen nearby, terror painted across their young faces, knowing better than to intervene. The video was only 40 seconds long, but it might as well have been an eternity. When it ended, Robert couldn't breathe, his vision blurred with rage and anguish. How did I not see this? The question tore through him like a serrated blade, because the answer was simple and damning. He hadn't wanted to see it. "The children have been living in fear, Mr. Harrison," Anna continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every day after you leave for work, she changes. She locks their bedroom doors from the outside at night, says it's for discipline and structure. She makes them skip meals if they don't finish homework fast enough. She tells them their mother would be ashamed of them, that they're the reason you're always sad." Each word was another nail in the coffin of the life Robert thought he'd built. He'd noticed things, of course, Michael's grades dropping, Sarah becoming withdrawn, Tommy's nightmares getting worse. But he chalked it up to grief, to the normal struggles of a blended family adjusting, need he never imagined. Couldn't he have imagined that the woman sharing his bed was systematically destroying his children's spirits every single day? The shadows in his own home had hidden the truth from him. But now those shadows were being dragged into the light, and there was no looking away anymore. Revenge wasn't even on his mind yet. First, he had to face what his ignorance had cost the three people he loved most in this world. From the living room, Margaret's voice rang out, sharp and cold. "I said kneel, properly, Sarah. You think your crocodile tears will save you? Your father isn't here to rescue you this time." Robert's hands clenched into fists. Every fiber of his being wanted to storm in there, to grab his children and throw Margaret out onto the street where she belonged. But Anna held him back, her eyes pleading. "Not yet, sir. She's smart. She'll lie. Twist everything, make it seem like the children are exaggerating or that you're overreacting. You need to be strategic. Document everything. Talk to lawyers. If you confront her now without a plan, she might take them away. Legally, she's still their legal guardian by marriage." The words hit Robert like ice water. Anna was right. Margaret had been calculating from the beginning, and she wouldn't go down without a fight. This wasn't just about exposing her cruelty, it was about protecting his children from further harm. It's about making sure the truth won over the shadows she'd cast over their lives. And as Robert stood there, hidden in his own hallway, listening to his children suffer, he made a silent vow. Whatever it took, however long it took, he would make this right. The truth would win. It always did. Just had to be willing to fight for it. Robert Harrison's hands trembled as he peered around the marble archway, and what he saw in that living room would haunt him for the rest of his life. His three children, Michael, Sarah, and Tommy, were kneeling on the hardwood floor in a perfect row. Back straight, hands folded, textbooks open in front of them like prisoners at a Soviet interrogation. Margaret stood over them, arms crossed, her designer heels clicking slowly as she paced back and forth, inspecting them like a drill sergeant inspecting soldiers who'd failed inspection. Her face, normally so warm and radiant when Robert was around, had transformed into something cold and mechanical, a mask of contempt that made his blood run cold. "Read it again, Sarah." Margaret's voice cut through the silence like a whip crack. "And this time, don't stutter like an idiot. Your mother may have tolerated mediocrity, but I won't." The venom in those words hit Robert like a physical blow, and he had to grip the archway to keep from collapsing. If you've ever witnessed someone you love being broken down piece by piece, you know the rage and helplessness flooding through him right now, and you want to believe how much darker this gets. Sarah, his sweet 9-year-old daughter who used to sing in the mornings and draw pictures of butterflies, was trembling so badly the book shook in her small hands. The Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. She stammered, her voice barely above a whisper, thick with tears she was desperately trying to hold back. Margaret moved closer, looming over the child like a vulture circling wounded prey. "Pathetic," she hissed. Absolutely pathetic. "Do you know what happens to stupid little girls who can't even read a simple sentence? They end up nowhere," just like she paused, letting the cruelty sink in deeper. Just like their mother did. Dead and forgotten. Robert felt something inside him shatter. Anna grabbed his arm harder, sensing he was about to break cover, her nails digging into his suit jacket. Michael, the oldest at 12, instinctively moved closer to his sister, trying to shield her without being obvious about it. But Margaret saw it immediately. "Did I tell you to move, Michael?" Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "You think you can protect her?" She laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth or humanity. "Your father doesn't even know you exist half the time. He's too busy making money to care what happens to you. Ungrateful brats." Tommy, only 6 years old, started crying softly, his little shoulders shaking as he tried to muffle the sound with his hand. Margaret whirled on him like a predator spotting weakness. "Ow! Here we go again." The baby crying because life is so hard. She crouched down to his level, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than her shouts. "Let me tell you something, Tommy. Your tears don't move me. They disgust me. Real men don't cry over nothing. And you," she tapped his forehead hard with one manicured finger, "you're not even close to being a man. You're a burden, a mistake, and every single day I have to look at your weak little face. I'm reminded of what a fool your father was for keeping you three around. Roberts? Vision blurred with tears he hadn't even realized were falling. The shadows he'd been living in for 2 years were suddenly illuminated with brutal clarity. And he couldn't unsee what had been hiding there all along. Anna whispered urgently. This is every day, sir. Every single day when you're gone. Sometimes worse. What would you do if you discovered your own home had become a prison for the people you love most? Would you have the strength to face what comes next? Or would you run from the truth? Margaret stood up, smoothing her dress, and checked her watch with theatrical precision. You have 15 more minutes of reading. And then you write me a 2-page essay on gratitude for having a roof over your heads, food on the table, and a stepmother patient enough to tolerate your existence. She walked to the velvet sofa and sat down, crossing her legs elegantly, pulling out her phone and scrolling through it with bored indifference. As if the 3 terrified children in front of her were nothing more than furniture she had to tolerate. Michael helped Sarah wipe her tears discreetly, and Tommy tried to focus on his book, but his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't turn the pages. The room was filled with a suffocating tension, the kind that comes from living in constant fear, never knowing when the next blow, verbal or physical, would land. Robert realized with horrifying clarity that this wasn't occasional discipline gone wrong. This was systematic psychological torture, carefully calibrated to break his children's spirits while leaving no visible bruises, no evidence that would hold up in court. Margaret was smart, calculated, and utterly ruthless. The revenge forming in Robert's mind wasn't about anger anymore. It was about justice. It's about dragging these shadows into the light where everyone could see them for what they really were. Anna's phone vibrated softly, and she glanced at it, then showed Robert the screen. Another video, this one from last week. He watched in silent agony as Margaret forced Michael to stand in the corner for 3 hours because he'd gotten a B+ instead of an A on a math test. Sarah was made to eat her dinner on the floor like the dog you act like because she'd left a toy in the hallway. Tommy was locked in his room for an entire Saturday because he'd laughed too loudly during breakfast. Each clip was a knife twisting deeper into Robert's heart, evidence of a cruelty so methodical it had to have been planned from the beginning. She married me for my money, Robert whispered, the realization hitting him like a freight train. Never wanted to be their mother. She wanted the lifestyle, the mansion, the status, and my children were just obstacles to manage. Anna nodded sadly. I think she believes she could make them disappear into boarding schools eventually, sir. She's been researching them. I've seen the brochures hidden in her office-strict military academies overseas. It's the kind that take troubled children and keep them away for years. The truth was worse than Robert had imagined. Margaret hadn't just been cruel, she'd been systematically planning to erase his children from his life entirely. From the living room, Margaret's voice cut through again. The time's up. Michael, collect the books. Sarah, stop sniffling, or you'll regret it. Tommy, stand up straight. You look like a hunchback. The children moved like robots, their natural childhood joy and spontaneity completely suppressed, replaced by fear-driven obedience. Robert watched as Michael carefully stacked the textbooks, his movements precise and cautious, avoiding any mistake that might trigger another outburst. Sarah wiped her face quickly, forcing herself to stop crying through sheer willpower that no 9-year-old should have to possess. Tommy stood ramrod straight, his little face a mask of concentration, terrified of doing anything wrong. Have you ever seen innocence destroyed right before your eyes? These children were learning that love meant pain, that home meant fear, and if Robert didn't act soon, the damage might become permanent. But as Margaret glanced toward the hallway almost as if she sensed something, Robert and Anna pressed themselves flatter against the wall, barely breathing. The truth was inches away from exploding into the open. Neither of them knew if they were ready for what would happen when it finally did. Margaret's phone rang, breaking the tension, and she answered with a voice suddenly dripping with false sweetness. Oh, darling, yes, I'm just here with the children. They're being absolute angels today. Robert's stomach turned. That was the voice she used for him, the performance she'd perfected. He'd believed every word of it.
Mr. Harrison, there is something else. You need to know something I've been too afraid to tell anyone until now. Anna's voice trembled as she pulled Robert further down the hallway, away from the living room where Margaret's false phone conversation continued. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and for the first time since he'd known her, Robert saw genuine terror etched into every line of her face. What she does to them during the day is only part of it. At night, sir, at night it gets so much worse. Robert felt his heart stop. Worse. How could it possibly get worse than what he'd already witnessed? But as Anna began to speak, describing the systematic nightmare his children had been living through for 2 years, he realized he'd only seen the tip of an iceberg that went far deeper and darker than he'd ever imagined. If you've ever discovered that someone you trusted was living a double life, you know the vertigo Robert felt, that sickening moment when your entire reality shifts beneath your feet and you don't know what's real anymore. Anna led him to a small service closet near the kitchen, closing the door behind them so they could whisper without being overheard. Every night after you go to bed, Mr. Harrison, she waits about an hour until she's sure you're asleep. Then she goes to each child's room and locks them in from the outside. Robert's jaw tightened. She told me it was for safety, that they'd been having nightmares and sleepwalking. She lied. Sir Anna interrupted, her voice breaking. They're not sleepwalking, they're crying. I've heard them, night after night, crying and calling for you, but they can't get out. Tommy especially, he's terrified of the dark, and she knows it. She turns off all the lights in his room, locks the door, and leaves him there alone for hours. Robert's hands balled into fists, so tight his knuckles went white. His youngest son, barely 6 years old, had been sleeping in terror every single night, while Robert slept peacefully just down the hall, completely oblivious. The shadows of his ignorance were being torn away strip by strip, revealing a truth so ugly he could barely stand to look at it. But he had to look. He owed his children that much. What would you do if you learned that evil had been living under your roof, hiding in plain sight while you slept? Would you have the courage to face it head-on, or would you let fear paralyze you into inaction? There's more, Sir Anna continued, pulling out a small notebook from her apron pocket. Her hands shook as she opened it, revealing pages of handwritten notes, dates, times, descriptions of incidents. I started keeping a record 3 months ago when I realized how bad it was getting. I didn't know who to tell or if anyone would believe me. Mrs. Margaret is very careful. She never leaves marks where you'd see them. Never does anything when there's a chance you might come home early. Until today, that is. Robert took the notebook, scanning the entries with growing horror. March 15th, Margaret made Michael kneel on rice for 45 minutes because he forgot to make his bed. March 22nd, Sarah denied dinner for spilling milk at breakfast. March 29th, Tommy locked in closet for 2 hours for crying about missing his mother. The list went on and on, a chronicle of cruelty that made Robert's stomach turn. Why didn't you call the police? Child Protective Services? Anna looked down, shame coloring her cheeks. I tried once, sir. called anonymously, but when they came to investigate, Margaret put on such a perfect performance, had the children all cleaned up, smiling, well-fed. She told them I was a disgruntled employee trying to cause trouble because she'd disciplined me. The case was closed within a week, and after they left, Anna swallowed hard. She punished the children for 3 days straight, told them it was their fault the authorities had come, that if they ever tried to get help again, she'd make sure they never saw you again. The systematic nature of Margaret's abuse was becoming clearer with every revelation. This wasn't random cruelty or occasional loss of temper. This was calculated psychological warfare designed to break his children's spirits completely while maintaining a perfect facade for the outside world. Robert thought back to all the times Margaret had seemed like the perfect wife and stepmother. The school events she attended with a bright smile, the family dinners where she'd play the loving mother, the charity galas where she'd talk about how blessed she was to have inherited such wonderful children. It had all been an act, a performance worthy of an Oscar. While behind closed doors, she was systematically destroying the 3 people he loved most in the world. The revenge he'd been contemplating was no longer just about exposing hurt, was about making sure she could never hurt another child again, about ensuring the truth burned away every shadow she'd hidden behind. "Does she know you've been documenting this?" Robert asked, his voice deadly calm. Anna shook her head. "I don't think so. I'm very careful. But, sir, she's getting bolder. Last week, she hit Michael first time she's done that. Left a bruise on his shoulder where you wouldn't see it under his shirt. I think she's testing how far she can go." Robert's mind raced through the implications. If Margaret was escalating, it meant the children were in even more danger than he'd thought. "The morning routine," Anna continued, "is just as bad. She wakes them at 5:30 a.m., makes them do chores for an hour before school, cleaning bathrooms, scrubbing floors, things that aren't age-appropriate. She tells them it's to build character, but really it's just another way to exhaust and control them. By the time they get to school, they're already tired. That's why Michael's grades have been dropping. He's not stupid, sir. He's exhausted." Every word was another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Robert had noticed his son's fatigue, the dark circles under his eyes, but he'd assumed it was normal teenage changes, growing pains. He'd never questioned it, never looked deeper, and that failure of vigilance had cost his children dearly. "She also controls their food," Anna went on, flipping to another page in her notebook. "Breakfast is usually just toast and water. Lunch they get at school, which she can't control. But dinner depends entirely on their behavior that day. If she's in a bad mood or they've made any small mistake, they go to bed hungry. Tommy has lost 8 pounds since she came into your lives, Mr. Harrison. 8 pounds on a child who was already small for his age. Have you ever realized that the monster in your story wasn't hiding under the bed, but sleeping right next to you every night? That's what Robert was grappling with. Now, the horrifying realization that he'd shared a bed, shared his life, shared his children with someone whose cruelty knew no bounds. Margaret had targeted his family with surgical precision, knowing exactly how to exploit his busy schedule, his grief over losing his first wife, his desperate desire to give his children a mother figure. She'd studied him like a predator studies prey, identified his weaknesses, and struck when he was most vulnerable. And the worst part, he'd made it easy for her. He'd been so grateful to have someone willing to take on 3 grieving children that he'd never stopped to question her motives or watch how she treated them when she thought no one was looking. The truth was a bitter pill. He'd failed his children by trusting too easily, by wanting to believe in a happy ending so badly that he'd ignored every warning sign screaming at him to look closer. But ignorance wasn't an option anymore. The shadows were gone, burned away by the harsh light of truth. And now Robert had to decide what kind of father, what kind of man he was going to be. Would he let Margaret continue her reign of terror, or would he fight back with everything he had, no matter the cost? As Anna closed her notebook and met his eyes, Robert knew the answer. The truth would win. It had to, because the alternative, letting his children suffer one more day under Margaret's cruelty, was simply unbearable.
Robert Harrison pulled out his phone with shaking hands, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm calling my lawyer right now. I'm ending this tonight." But Anna grabbed his wrist, her eyes wide with panic. "No, sir, please, you can't. Not yet." Robert stared at her like she'd lost her mind. His children were being tortured, and she wanted him to wait. "Listen to me," Anna pleaded urgently, glancing toward the hallway where Margaret's voice still echoed. "If you move too fast, she'll destroy you in court. She's been planning this for 2 years. She has legal rights as their stepmother. She's documented everything to make herself look perfect, and she'll twist this whole thing to make you look like the negligent father who is never home." The words hit Robert like ice water, cooling his rage just enough to let logic creep back in. Anna was right. Margaret was calculated, methodical, and she'd positioned herself legally to have power over his children. One wrong move, and he could lose them forever. If you've ever had to choose between immediate action and strategic patience when someone you love was in danger, you know the agony of that decision, and you about to see why waiting might be the only way to win this war. Anna pulled Robert deeper into the service closet, her voice urgent but controlled. "I've been documenting everything for 3 months, sir, but we need more. We need irrefutable proof, the kind that no judge, no lawyer, no jury could possibly deny. Videos, medical records if we can get them, testimony from the children themselves when they feel safe enough to speak." Robert's jaw clenched. How much more do they have to suffer before we have enough proof? The question hung in the air like smoke. Anna's eyes filled with tears. "I know it's not fair, sir. I know every fiber of your being wants to storm in there and protect them right now. But if we do this wrong, if we go in without a solid plan, Margaret will paint you as an absentee father who is being manipulated by a vindictive employee. She'll get custody, or at least visitation rights, and the abuse will continue. Only next time, she'll be more careful, more hidden." Robert knew she was right, but the knowledge felt like swallowing glass. The shadows that had hidden Margaret's cruelty all this time had to be burned away completely, with so much light that she'd have nowhere left to hide. That meant being smart, being patient, and building a case so airtight that the truth would be undeniable. "What's your plan?" Robert asked, forcing himself to think strategically, despite the rage boiling in his veins. Anna took a deep breath, steadying herself. First, we need to install hidden cameras in the common areas, living room, kitchen, hallways. Nothing in bathrooms or bedrooms where it would be illegal, but enough to catch her in the act during the day. Second, I need you to start coming home at random times, different hours, unannounced, so we can catch her off guard more often. She's gotten comfortable with your predictable schedule. Robert nodded slowly, his mind already working through the logistics. Third, Anna continued, we need to document the children's emotional and physical state. I've been taking photos of bruises when I can, but we need a doctor to examine them, someone who can testify that these injuries aren't accidental. Robert felt his stomach turn at the thought of his children being examined for abuse, but he knew it was necessary. The revenge he wanted wasn't about violence or even public humiliation. It was about using the truth as a weapon to cut through every lie Margaret had built her fake life upon. What would you do if the only way to save your family was to let them suffer a little longer while you built your case? Could you live with that choice, knowing every day of delay meant another day of pain for the people you love most? There's something else, Anna said hesitantly, pulling out her phone again. I have access to Mrs. Margaret's computer. She doesn't know I know the password. Last week, I found emails. Robert's eyes sharpened. Emails to who? To her sister in California. Long emails where she talks about the children like they're obstacles she's trying to remove. She's been researching boarding schools in Europe, the strict kind military academies that take children year-round. She's been planning to convince you to send them away, probably by making it seem like they're becoming unmanageable or troubled. Robert felt bile rise in his throat. Margaret's plan was even more sinister than he. Dee imagined she wasn't just abusing his children, she was actively working to exile them from his life entirely, to have him all to herself, along with his money and status. Forward those emails to me, Robert said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Forward everything. And from now on, document every single thing she does. I don't care if it seems minor. I want a complete record. Anna nodded, already pulling up the files. I'll send them to your private email, the one she doesn't have access to. Robert's mind raced through the implications of what Anna was describing. If they could prove premeditation, that Margaret had planned from the beginning to isolate and eventually remove his children from his life, it would destroy any sympathy she might receive in court. It would show her not as a struggling stepmother, but as a calculating predator who married him under false pretenses. How long do you think we need? Robert asked, though every word felt like betrayal to his children, who were suffering just yards away. 2 weeks, Anna said firmly. Maybe 3 at most. Enough time to get solid video evidence, medical documentation, the email trail, and possibly testimony from teachers who might have noticed changes in the children. Then we go to a family court judge with everything at once. No warning, no chance for her to prepare a defense. Robert nodded slowly, the plan crystallizing in his mind. And in the meantime, I need to act normal. Go to work, come home, pretend everything's fine. Anna's expression was pained but determined. Yes, sir? I know it feels impossible, but if she suspects, she'll either run or she'll escalate, and both options put the children in more danger. The sound of Margaret's footsteps in the hallway made them both freeze. Anna? Anna? Where are you? I need fresh coffee brought to the living room. Her voice was sharp, imperious, the tone of someone used to being obeyed without question. Anna squeezed Robert's hand once, a silent gesture of solidarity, then slipped out of the closet to answer the summons. Robert stayed hidden, listening as Anna's voice responded with practiced subservience. Right away, Mrs. Harrison. He heard the coffee machine start up in the kitchen, heard Margaret's heels clicking on the marble floors, heard his children's quiet voices as they were ordered to clean up their books and prepare for dinner. Everything sounded so normal, so domestic, and that was the most horrifying part. Evil didn't always announce itself with dramatic music and obvious villainy. Sometimes it wore designer clothes and a perfect smile, hiding in plain sight while destroying lives one small cruelty at a time. But Robert Harrison wasn't going to let those shadows protect Margaret anymore. He was going to shine so much light on her darkness that there'd be nowhere left for her to hide. Have you ever had to pretend everything was fine while your heart was breaking, waiting for the right moment to strike back against injustice? That's the position Robert found himself in, and the next 2 weeks would test every ounce of self-control he possessed. He slipped out of the closet when the coast was clear, composed his face into a neutral expression, and walked quietly toward the front door. He'd leave, drive around the block, and come home in 20 minutes like nothing had happened. The performance had to be perfect, because the truth was building its case, gathering its evidence, and soon, very soon, it would explode into the light with enough force to shatter Margaret's carefully constructed lies forever. 23 days had passed since Robert Harrison discovered the truth, and every single one of them had been torture. He watched Margaret smile at breakfast, while knowing she locked his children in their rooms the night before. He'd kissed her goodbye each morning, while rage burned in his chest like acid. He'd attended business meetings, while hidden cameras in his home captured evidence of systematic abuse. And today, finally, the evidence was complete. The lawyers were briefed, and tonight would be the last night Margaret Harrison would ever spend under his roof. But first, Robert needed to do something he should have done weeks ago. He needed to talk to his children. Anna had texted him the signal. She's upstairs. Now. And as Robert walked through his front door at 6 p.m. on a Thursday evening, his heart hammered with a mixture of rage, guilt, and desperate hope that it wasn't too late to save his children from the shadows that had consumed their lives. The living room was exactly as Anna had described in her texts. Michael, Sarah, and Tommy sitting on the floor with homework spread around them, their faces drawn and exhausted, moving through their assignments with the mechanical precision of soldiers afraid to make mistakes. They didn't hear Robert enter. Anna had made sure the door didn't creak, had positioned herself as a lookout near the stairs. When Michael finally glanced up and saw his father standing there, the 12-year-old's face went through a transformation that nearly broke Robert's heart. Shock, then fear, then desperate hope, then terror again, as he glanced toward the stairs where Margaret had gone. "Dad," Michael whispered, a single word carrying 2 years of suppressed pain. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes immediately filling with tears. Tommy just stared, frozen like a deer in headlights, too afraid to even react. Robert dropped to his knees on the hardwood floor, opening his arms, and in that moment, all the careful planning, all the strategic patience, all the legal maneuvering meant nothing compared to the simple truth. His children needed him. "Come here," he said softly, his voice breaking. "Please, come here." What happened next would be burned into Robert's memory forever. Michael moved first, slowly at first, then breaking into a run and throwing himself into his father's arms, his whole body shaking with suppressed sobs he'd been holding back for months. Sarah followed, clutching her father's shirt like she'd never let go, tears streaming down her face in silent rivers. And little Tommy, who'd been told his mother died because of him, crawled into Robert's lap and curled into a ball, finally allowing himself to cry out loud for the first time in who knew how long. Robert held them all, these 3 pieces of his broken heart, and let his own tears fall without shame. "I know," he whispered into their hair. "I know everything. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner." Anna stood guard at the stairs, her own face wet with tears, one hand pressed to her mouth to stifle the sounds of her crying. If you've ever held someone who'd been carrying unbearable weight and felt them finally release it, you understand the sacred nature of that moment, when truth finally breaks through the shadows and healing can begin, even if the scars will remain forever. Michael pulled back first, wiping his face roughly, his voice barely audible. "Dad," she said. "She said if we ever told you, you wouldn't believe us. That you loved her more than us now." Robert's heart shattered into even smaller pieces. "That's a lie, Michael. The biggest lie anyone's ever told you. You three are everything to me. Everything." Sarah's small voice joined in, trembling. "She locks us in at night. We can't get out if we need the bathroom, or if Tommy has nightmares. We just have to wait until morning." Tommy's contribution was almost inaudible. "She says Mommy died because we were bad. That Mommy wanted to get away from us." Robert had to close his eyes against the wave of rage that threatened to overwhelm him. Margaret hadn't he just been cruel, she'd he been psychologically torturing children who'd he already lost their mother, weaponizing their grief, turning their love into a tool for control. The revenge Robert had been planning suddenly felt inadequate. No legal judgment, no public exposure, no financial penalty could truly balance the scales for what she'd done to these innocent souls. "Listen to me carefully," Robert said, cupping each of their faces in turn, making sure they heard every word. "Your mother didn't die because of you. She died because cancer is a horrible disease that we couldn't stop, no matter how hard we tried. She loved you more than anything in this world. Her last words were about how much she loved you. And Margaret," he struggled to keep his voice steady, "Margaret lied to you about everything. She lied to manipulate you, to control you, to make you afraid. But that ends tonight." Michael's eyes widened. "Tonight?" Robert nodded firmly. "Tonight, she leaves this house and never comes back. I have lawyers. I have evidence. I have everything we need to make sure she can never hurt you again. And I promise you, I swear on your mother's memory, that I will never, ever let anyone treat you like this again." Sarah grabbed his hand desperately. "But what if she doesn't leave? What if she says we're lying?" Anna spoke up from the stairs, her voice strong despite the tears. "We have videos, Sarah, recordings of everything she did. Your father has been building a case for 3 weeks. She has no way to lie her way out of this time." Tommy's small voice piped up with heartbreaking clarity. "Are you going to stay home with us now, Daddy? Not go to work anymore?" The question cut deeper than any knife, because it exposed the root of everything. Robert's absence had created the space for Margaret's abuse to flourish unchecked. "I'm going to be here a lot more," Robert promised, kissing the top of Tommy's head. "I'm going to rearrange my whole life so that you three are the center of it, the way you always should have been. I made terrible mistakes trusting the wrong person, being gone too much, not paying attention to the signs. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life making that up to you." Michael, showing maturity beyond his years, asked the question Robert had been dreading. "Dad, will she try to take us away?" "In court?" Robert took a deep breath, choosing honesty. "She might try. But we have truth on our side, and truth is the most powerful weapon there is. When judges see the evidence, when they hear from you if you're willing to testify, when they understand the full scope of what she did, there's no way she wins. The shadows she's been hiding in are gone now. We've burned them all away. Have you ever had to explain to a child that the world isn't always fair, but that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win if they fight hard enough?" That was the moment Robert found himself in, trying to give his traumatized children hope without making promises he couldn't keep. The sound of a door opening upstairs sent all 3 children into immediate panic mode, back straightening, tears being wiped away frantically, homework being grabbed with shaking hands. The conditioning was instantaneous and heartbreaking to witness. But Robert stood up, placing himself between his children and the stairs, and for the first time in 3 weeks, he didn't hide. Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs, her hair perfectly styled, her expression shifting from surprise to calculation in a microsecond. "Robert, I didn't hear you come in. You're home early." Her voice was honey-sweet, but Robert could see the wariness in her eyes. She knew something was different. The truth was coming for her, and deep down, she could feel it approaching like a freight train she couldn't stop. "We need to talk, Margaret," Robert said calmly, his voice carrying none of the warmth it used to hold for her. "Right now." In private, the children huddled behind him, and Margaret's eyes flickered to them, then to Anna, standing guard, then back to Robert. "Of course, darling," she purred, descending the stairs with calculated grace. "Whenever you need." But as she reached the bottom step and saw Robert's face, truly saw it, her smile faltered just slightly. She'd been caught before she even knew the trap had been sprung, and the truth Dee'd been running from for 2 years was about to drag her into the light where everyone could finally see her for what she really was. "Margaret, I know everything." 4 words. That's all it took for the mask to slip. Margaret Harrison Elegant, composed Margaret who'd played the perfect wife for 2 years, froze on the bottom stair, her hand gripping the banister so tightly her knuckles went white. "I'm sorry, what?" she said, forcing a confused laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "No what, darling?" "You're being rather cryptic." But Robert saw at the microsecond of calculation, the way her gaze darted to Anna, to the children huddled behind him, to the exits. She was already planning her defense, already constructing lies to explain away whatever he might have discovered. But this time, the shadows she'd been hiding in were gone. This time, Robert had burned them all away with 3 weeks of careful documentation, hidden cameras, medical reports, and testimony from teachers who'd noticed the children's declining emotional state. The truth was about to hit her like a sledgehammer, and there was nowhere left to run. Robert pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward her. The video began playing Margaret's own voice, screaming at Tommy, calling him worthless, telling him his mother died to escape him. Her face on the screen was twisted with contempt, unrecognizable from the woman who smiled at charity galas. Margaret's expression shifted rapidly. Shock, then anger, then fear, then back to calculated composure. "That's taken out of context," she said quickly, descending the final stairs with forced confidence. "Children can be extremely difficult, Robert. Sometimes discipline requires firm language. You'd understand if you were home more often." The deflection was textbook blame the victim, attack the accuser, minimize the evidence. But Robert had spent 3 weeks preparing for every manipulation tactic she might use, and he wasn't falling for any of them. "Out of context?" he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "I have 47 videos, Margaret. 47 separate incidents over 3 weeks. I have medical documentation of bruises, malnutrition, and psychological trauma. I have emails to your sister describing my children as obstacles you replanning to remove. And I have Anna's sworn testimony corroborating every single claim. Have you ever watched someone's carefully constructed lies crumble in real time, seeing them realize that the game is over and they've lost?" That's what Robert witnessed as Margaret's face finally showed genuine fear. The children pressed closer to their father, Michael's hand gripping Robert's jacket. Margaret's eyes flickered to them, and for a moment, Robert saw calculation in her gaze. She was considering whether she could still manipulate the situation, turn the children against him somehow. But then Anna stepped forward, phone in hand. "I have the recording of you, threatening to send them to military school in Switzerland if they ever told their father about the abuse. Mrs. Harrison, I have the photos of the locks you installed on their bedroom doors, the ones that only lock from the outside. And I have your search history from your laptop, showing you researching boarding schools that handle troubled children, despite the fact that these children have never been in any kind of trouble." Margaret's composure finally shattered. "You had no right to go through my personal belongings," she spat, her voice losing its cultivated sweetness. "That's an invasion of privacy. I could sue you for that." Anna's response was calm but firm. "Actually, Mom, when there's reasonable suspicion of child abuse, documentation is not only legal but encouraged. Mr. Harrison's lawyers have confirmed that." Everything we collected is admissible in court. The word court hit Margaret like a physical blow. She turned to Robert, her strategy shifting again, this time to pleading. Robert, please, I love you. I love this family. Yes, I've been strict with the children, but I was only trying to give them structure, to help them overcome their grief. You can't possibly believe I'd intentionally hurt them. The performance was Oscar-worthy, complete with tears forming in her eyes. But Robert looked past her to his children, Michael's face, hard with mistrust, Sarah's eyes, wide with fear. Tommy trembling against his father's leg, and he knew with absolute certainty that every word coming out of Margaret's mouth was poison dressed up as love. You locked a 6-year-old child in a dark room, knowing he's terrified of the dark, Robert said, his voice breaking with controlled rage. You told my daughter that her mother was ashamed of her. You made my son kneel on rice until his knees bled. Don't you dare stand there and call that love? Margaret's tears dried up instantly, replaced by cold fury. And what are you going to do about it, Robert? Divorce me? Fine. I'll take half of everything you own. My lawyers will make sure of that. Actually, no, you won't. A new voice entered from the doorway. Robert's attorney, James Mitchell, walked in carrying a briefcase, followed by 2 police officers. Margaret's face went pale. What is this? James opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency. Mrs. Harrison, I'm James Mitchell, Mr. Harrison's attorney. These officers are here because we've filed charges of child abuse, child endangerment, and assault. Additionally, the prenuptial agreement you signed has a morality clause that voids all financial claims in the event of proven abuse or infidelity. The evidence against you is substantial and, frankly, incontrovertible. One of the officers stepped forward. Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning. Margaret's world was imploding in real time, and the panic on her face was genuine now. She looked at Robert with desperation. You're making a mistake. Those videos can be explained. Anna is lying. She's always been jealous of me. The children are confused, influenced by her lies. But Robert just shook his head sadly. The only mistake I made was trusting you. The only lie was the one you lived every single day. What would you do in the moment when justice finally arrives after years of suffering? Would you feel vindicated? Or would you just feel the weight of all the time lost to lies and manipulation? Margaret made one final play, turning to the children with tears streaming down her face. Michael, Sarah, Tommy, tell them. Tell them I love you. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. But the children didn't move. After 2 years of conditioning, of threats and manipulation, they finally felt safe enough to stay silent, to let their father's protection shield them from her one last time. The silence was damning, more powerful than any testimony could have been. Margaret's face twisted with rage, the mask finally shattering completely. You ungrateful little brats. After everything I did, all the sacrifices I made pretending to care about you. The officer cut her off. Ma'am, I'd recommend you stop talking. As they led Margaret toward the door in handcuffs, she shot Robert one final look of pure hatred. This isn't over, she hissed. But Robert, with his children wrapped in his arms, and Anna standing beside him like the guardian angel she'd been all along, knew differently. The truth had won. The shadows were gone. And while the healing would take time years, probably the nightmare was finally, truly over. As the door closed behind Margaret Harrison, the house seemed to exhale, releasing 2 years of tension in one collective breath. Tommy whispered, Is she really gone, Daddy? And Robert, tears streaming down his face, answered with the first completely honest promise he'd made in a long time. Yes, son. She's really gone. And she's never coming back. The door closed behind Margaret Harrison with a finality that echoed through the mansion like a judge's gavel. The police car's red and blue lights faded down the long driveway, taking with them 2 years of terror, manipulation, and carefully constructed lies. Robert stood in the foyer, with his arms still wrapped around his 3 children, feeling their small bodies shake with a mixture of relief and residual fear. Anna stood nearby, tears streaming down her weathered face, one hand pressed to her heart. Nobody spoke for a long moment. There were no words big enough to contain what they just witnessed. Justice had arrived, swift and uncompromising, but the shadows Margaret had cast over this family wouldn't disappear as quickly as she had. The truth had won its first major victory, but the war for healing was just beginning, and Robert knew the hardest battles were still ahead. If you've ever experienced that moment when a nightmare finally ends, but you're still not sure if you're truly awake, you understand exactly what this family was feeling, suspended between disbelief and desperate hope that this peace might actually last. Michael was the first to move, pulling back from his father's embrace to look toward the door where Margaret had been led away in handcuffs. "Is she really gone?" he asked, his 12-year-old voice cracking with emotion. He'd been holding back for so long, it had become part of his DNA. "Can she come back?" Robert knelt down to meet his son's eyes that looked far older than they should, aged by suffering no child should ever endure. "She's gone, Michael. And she's facing criminal charges that will keep her away from you for a very long time. The restraining order means she can't come within 500 feet of any of you, can't contact you in any way. And even after she serves whatever sentence the court gives her, she have no legal rights to you. None." Sarah, his 9-year-old daughter, whispered the question that was probably on all their minds. "But what if she escapes? What if she comes back at night?" The fear in her voice broke Robert's heart all over again, because it proved just how deeply Margaret's psychological warfare had penetrated. Tommy just clung tighter to his father's leg, too overwhelmed to even form words, his little body trembling like a leaf in a storm. Anna moved forward, her practical nature kicking in despite her emotional state. "Mr. Harrison, the children need to eat something. Real food, a proper dinner." Robert realized with a shock that he hadn't even thought about dinner. His mind had been so consumed with the confrontation that basic needs had completely slipped his awareness. "You're right, Anna. Thank you." He looked at his children. "What do you want?" "Anything. Pizza? Burgers? We can order whatever you'd like." The children looked at each other uncertainly, as if waiting for permission or fearing a trap. This simple question, "What do you want to eat?" had been denied them for so long that they'd forgotten how to answer it. Finally, Tommy's small voice piped up, "Can we have chicken nuggets and French fries and ice cream?" His tone was hesitant, like he expected to be punished for asking. Robert felt tears prick his eyes again. "Yes, son, you can have all of that. And you know what else? From now on, you get to choose what you want, every single day. No more punishments, no more going hungry, no more being told you don't deserve things." What would you do if you suddenly had to teach children that it was safe to want things again, safe to express preferences, safe to exist without fear? That's the invisible damage abuse leaves behind. It doesn't just hurt, it rewrites how victims see the entire world. While Anna called in a massive takeout order from the children's favorite restaurant something Margaret had forbidden as junk food that breeds lazy minds, Robert led his kids to the living room, the same room where just hours ago they'd been kneeling in fear. But now the energy was different. He turned on the television, something Margaret had strictly rationed, and let them choose whatever they wanted to watch. Sarah cautiously selected an animated movie, glancing at her father as if expecting him to veto it. When he just smiled and said, "Perfect choice," her face lit up with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her in months. Michael sat close to his father, not quite ready to let go of physical contact, while Tommy climbed into Robert's lap and stayed there, his little arms wrapped around his father's neck like he was afraid he might disappear. "Daddy," Tommy whispered, "are you going to stay home tomorrow? Or do you have to go to work?" The question cut deep because it revealed the core wound. The children had learned that their father's presence was temporary, that they couldn't count on him being there when they needed him most. "I'm taking the next month off," Robert announced, a decision he'd made the moment Margaret was led away. "I've already talked to my partners. They're handling everything. For the next 30 days, my only job is being your dad. We're going to spend time together, talk about everything you've been through, and start figuring out how to heal from this." Michael's eyes widened. "A whole month?" "A whole month," Robert confirmed. "And after that, I'm restructuring my entire schedule. I'm going to be home for breakfast every morning, home for dinner every night. I'll go to every school event, every parent-teacher conference, everything. I'm never going to let you feel abandoned again." Anna returned with updates on the food delivery, 30 minutes, and quietly excused herself to prepare the dining room. But Robert called her back. "Anna, I need to say something to you." The housekeeper turned, looking uncertain. "You saved my children's lives. If you hadn't had the courage to document everything, to risk your job and possibly your safety to protect them, I don't know what would have happened. You're not just an employee, Annie. More your family. And I'm giving you a raise, better hours, and whatever you need to feel secure here." Anna's face crumpled, and she started crying in earnest now, the kind of crying that comes from release of unbearable tension. "I just couldn't stand by and watch anymore, sir. Those babies needed someone to fight for them." "You did more than fight," Robert said, his own voice thick with emotion. "You won. We won. The truth won." The word hung in the air, truth, and everyone felt its weight. For 2 years, lies had ruled this house. Margaret's lies about loving the children. Robert's lies to himself about everything being fine. The children's forced lies whenever anyone asked if they were okay. But now truth had burned through all those shadows, painful and cleansing like fire. The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of dinner, and for the first time in years, the Harrison family sat down to a meal without fear, without tension, without walking on eggshells around a monster who wore designer clothes and a perfect smile. They ate chicken nuggets and French fries like it was a feast at a 5-star restaurant. They laughed tentatively at first, then more freely when Tommy got ketchup on his nose. They watched their movie without anyone timing them or criticizing their choices. It was simple, it was normal, and it was absolutely revolutionary. As the evening wound down and the children's eyelids grew heavy, Robert carried Tommy upstairs, something he hadn't done in far too long. Michael and Sarah followed, moving slowly as if afraid that sudden movements might break the spell of this strange new peace. When they reached Tommy's room, Robert noticed immediately what was different. The lock on the outside of the door was gone. Anna had removed it while they'd been downstairs. "Look," Robert said, pointing to where the lock had been. "No more locks. Your doors stay unlocked, and they're yours to open and close as you choose. If you have a nightmare, you can come to my room any time. If you need water, the kitchen is yours. This is your home, not your prison." He tucked Tommy in, kissed his forehead, and left the door open another small rebellion against Margaret's regime of isolation. He did the same for Sarah and Michael, spending time with each of them, answering their questions, reassuring their fears, promising that tomorrow would be better than today, and the day after that better still. When he finally made it back downstairs, Anna was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, looking exhausted but peaceful. "They're going to need therapy, sir," she said quietly. "Professional help to process everything they've been through." Robert nodded, already planning to call child psychologists in the morning. "Whatever they need, Anna, whatever it takes." The two of them sat in comfortable silence for a while, just breathing, just existing in a house that finally felt safe again. Then Anna asked the question that had been hovering unspoken. "What happens next, Mr. Harrison? With Mrs. Margaret, I mean." "The legal side." Robert pulled out his phone, reading the latest update from his attorney. She's being held overnight. Formal charges filed tomorrow morning. James says with the evidence we have, the videos, the medical reports, the emails, and testimony from you, and potentially the children if they re-emotionally ready, she is looking at criminal charges that could mean jail time. Even if she gets a plea deal, she'll have a permanent record, lose all parental rights, and be subject to the restraining order indefinitely. Anna nodded slowly. Good. She should face consequences. Not just for your children, but so she never has the chance to do this to another family. Robert agreed completely. This wasn't about revenge in the vindictive sense. It was about justice, about making sure Margaret's capacity to harm was permanently neutered. The truth had exposed her, and now the legal system would ensure she paid the price for her cruelty. As Robert climbed the stairs to check on his children one final time before bed, he felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. Real, genuine hope that his family could heal, that the shadows could be replaced with light, and that love, real love, not the twisted manipulation Margaret had called love, could rebuild what had been broken. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but at least now they were finally on it, moving forward together, with truth as their compass and justice as their shield. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear that truth always wins in the end, because stories like this remind us that even in our darkest moments, hope and justice are worth fighting for. 3 days had passed since Margaret's arrest, and Robert Harrison hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time. Not because of stress or fear, those had been replaced by cautious relief, but because every night, like clockwork, he was awakened by the sound of small footsteps padding down the hallway toward his bedroom door. First Tommy would arrive, having woken from another nightmare, crawling silently into bed beside his father. Then Sarah would appear an hour later, unable to sleep alone in a room that still held too many bad memories. Finally, Michael would knock softly around 3 a.m., too proud to admit he needed comfort, but desperately seeking it nonetheless. By dawn, Robert's king-sized bed was full of children who'd spent 2 years being locked away from him, and now couldn't bear to be separated even while sleeping. He didn't complain once. If anything, having them close helped quiet his own demons, the crushing weight of guilt that kept whispering that he should have seen it sooner, should have protected them better, should have been the father they deserved, instead of the absent workaholic who let a monster into their lives. The morning light filtered through the curtains, and Robert carefully extracted himself from the tangle of small bodies without waking them. He needed coffee and needed to think. Downstairs, Anna was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice. She looked up when Robert entered, immediately reading the exhaustion and guilt written across his face. "You can't keep blaming yourself, Mr. Harrison," she said gently, pouring him a cup of black coffee without being asked. What Margaret did, that was her choice, her evil. You didn't cause it. Robert accepted the coffee gratefully, but shook his head. I enabled it, Anna. I was so busy building my business empire that I handed my children over to someone I barely knew. I saw the warning signs, the way they got quieter, more withdrawn, and I convinced myself it was just grief over losing their mother. I chose to believe the lie because it was easier than facing a difficult truth. The words tasted bitter, more bitter than the coffee, because saying them out loud made them real in a way he couldn't escape. Anna sat down across from him, her weathered hands folded on the kitchen table. Do you want to know what I see when I look at you, sir? Robert met her eyes. I see a man who made mistakes, yes. But I also see a man who, the moment he learned the truth, didn't hesitate, didn't make excuses, didn't try to minimize it or sweep it under the rug. You acted immediately and decisively to protect your children, even though it meant destroying your marriage and facing your own failures. That takes courage most people don't have. Robert felt tears prick his eyes for what seemed like the 1,000th time in 3 days. But what if the damage is permanent? What if they never fully recover from what she did to them? Anna's expression was sad, but wise. Children are resilient, Mr. Harrison. More resilient than we give them credit for. Yes, they'll carry scars from this. But scars mean the wound healed. With time, therapy, and most importantly your love and presence, they can heal. They can have good lives. You just have to give them, and yourself, the grace to take it one day at a time. Have you ever had to forgive yourself for something you didn't even know you were doing wrong? That's the hardest kind of forgiveness, the kind directed inward, toward the parts of ourselves that failed when we should have been stronger. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced the children's arrival. They appeared in the kitchen doorway together, Michael holding Tommy's hand, Sarah hovering close by, all three still in pajamas with bed-rumpled hair and sleepy eyes. "Morning, Dad," Michael said, and something in his tone, the casual normalcy of it, made Robert's heart swell. For 2 years, mornings had meant tension and fear. Now, slowly, they were becoming just mornings again. "Morning, guys. Anna's making pancakes. Real pancakes with chocolate chips, not that healthy grain stuff Margaret used to force on you." The mention of Margaret's name made all three children tense slightly, a Pavlovian response that would probably take months to fully fade. But Tommy recovered first, his eyes lighting up. "With whipped cream, too?" "With whipped cream, strawberries, and whatever else you want," Robert confirmed, pulling out chairs for them at the kitchen table. As they ate slowly at first, still not quite believing food wouldn't be taken away as punishment, Robert brought up something he'd been thinking about all night. "I want to talk to you three about something important. About what happens next." The children's attention focused on him with an intensity that revealed how much they still worried about sudden changes, unexpected announcements that might shatter this fragile peace. "First," Robert began carefully, "I've hired a therapist. Her name is Dr. Patricia Reeves, and she specializes in helping children who've experienced trauma. She's going to meet with each of you individually, and sometimes all of us together as a family. I know talking about what happened with Margaret won't be easy, but it's important for healing." Michael frowned slightly. "Are we broken?" The question was so direct and vulnerable that Robert had to take a moment before answering. "No, buddy, you're not broken. But you've been hurt, and hurt needs care, just like a physical injury needs care. If you broke your arm, we'd take you to a doctor, right? This is the same thing, just for emotional injuries instead of physical ones." Sarah asked quietly. "Will the doctor make us talk about her? About the things she said to us?" Robert reached across the table to hold his daughter's small hand. "Only if and when you're ready. Dr. Reeves will go at your pace. There's no rush, no pressure. This is about helping you feel safe and happy again, not about forcing you to relive painful memories." Anna served the pancakes, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics, plans for the day, ideas for redecorating the children's rooms, getting rid of the Margaret aesthetic, as Michael had started calling it, and discussions about upcoming school events. But underneath the normalcy, Robert could feel the undercurrent of trauma still present in every interaction. Sarah flinched when someone moved too quickly. Tommy checked his father's expression constantly, looking for signs of disapproval. Michael had developed a protective posture, always positioning himself between his younger siblings and any potential threat, even imaginary ones. These were the invisible scars Anna had mentioned, and they would take time to heal. After breakfast, Robert gathered his children in the living room for what he'd been dreading most, the conversation about his own failures as their father. "I need to apologize to you three," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I failed you. I was so focused on my work, on providing for you financially, that I forgot the most important thing you needed was my time and attention. I brought Margaret into your lives without really knowing her, without watching how she treated you when I wasn't around. And when things started changing, when you got quieter and sadder, I didn't investigate. I didn't ask the right questions. I let you down in the worst possible way. Michael, showing wisdom beyond his 12 years, responded first. Dad, we didn't tell you because we were scared. She said you'd believe her over us, that adults always stick together. She made it seem like there was no point in trying. Robert nodded, tears flowing freely now. I understand that. And that's exactly why I failed. I should have created an environment where you felt safe telling me anything, even difficult things. I should have proven through my actions that I would always believe you, always protect you, always choose you first. Instead, I was distant enough that Margaret was able to convince you I wouldn't care. Sarah started crying too. We thought maybe you didn't want us anymore, that you were happy with her, and we were just in the way. The words were like knives to Robert's heart because they revealed just how deeply Margaret's poison had penetrated, how she'd managed to make his children doubt the one thing they should have never doubted, their father's love. Listen to me very carefully, Robert said, pulling all 3 children close. You are not in the way. You are not a burden. You are not any of the horrible things Margaret told you. You are my children, and you are the most important people in my entire life. I would give up everything, the business, the money, this house, everything, before I'd ever give you up. Do you understand me? Tommy sniffled against his father's chest. Really? Everything? Everything, Robert confirmed without hesitation. Money can be earned again. Houses can be bought again. But you 3? You're irreplaceable. You're precious. And I'm going to spend every day for the rest of my life proving that to you. They sat together like that for a long time, just holding each other, crying out 2 years of pain and fear and suppressed emotions. Anna watched from the doorway, her own tears flowing, knowing that this moment, this raw, honest moment of vulnerability and truth, was more healing than any therapy session could provide. This was a father finally showing up fully for his children. No masks, no defenses, just pure love and genuine repentance. As the morning turned into afternoon, Robert kept his children close, answering every question they'd been too afraid to ask, reassuring every fear they'd been too scared to voice. He told them about their mother, their real mother-sharing memories Margaret had forbidden them from talking about. He explained that grief was normal, that missing their mom didn't mean they were weak or bad. He promised that moving forward, they would face everything together as a family, with truth as their foundation and love as their guide. The shadows were still there, lingering at the edges, but they were growing smaller with each honest word, each genuine embrace, each moment of authentic connection that proved Margaret's lies wrong. By evening, exhausted but lighter somehow, the children fell asleep early, sprawled across the couch during a movie. Robert covered them with blankets and just watched them for a while. These 3 resilient souls who'd survived so much and were still capable of trust, still capable of hope. Anna joined him, handing him a fresh cup of coffee. They're going to be okay, Mr. Harrison. You all are. Robert nodded, wanting to believe it. We have a long road ahead. Yes, Anna agreed. But at least now you're walking it together, with no more secrets, no more lies between you. That's what matters most, not perfection, but presence. Not a flawless past, but a committed future. Robert realized she was right. He couldn't undo the 2 years his children had suffered under Margaret's cruelty. He couldn't erase his own failures and absences that had made that suffering possible. But he could be present now. He could show up every day, do the hard work of rebuilding trust, and prove through consistent action that his love for them was unshakable. The truth had freed them from Margaret's shadows. But now came the harder work healing, growing, and building a new normal based on honesty, presence, and unconditional love. It wouldn't be easy, but looking at his sleeping children, Robert knew it would be worth every difficult moment, every painful conversation, every step forward in the long journey toward wholeness. If this story of redemption and second chances moved you, Please leave a comment. Sharing your thoughts, sometimes knowing we're not alone in our struggles, is the first step toward healing. 6 weeks after Margaret's arrest, the Harrison household had transformed into something Robert barely recognized, and that was exactly the point. The heavy velvet drapes that Margaret had insisted gave the mansion's sophistication were gone, replaced by light, airy curtains that let sunshine flood every room. The children had picked out new paint colors for their bedrooms. Michael chose deep blue with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Sarah selected soft lavender with butterfly decals. And Tommy had gone with bright yellow, because it's happy color, Daddy. The formal dining room, where they once sat in tense silence during Margaret's interrogation-style dinners, had been converted into a game room, complete with board games, art supplies, and a reading nook. Every change, no matter how small, was a deliberate act of reclaiming their home from the shadows that had infected it. This wasn't just redecorating. This was exorcism through interior design, and it was working. The house was beginning to feel like a home again, like a place where laughter belonged and fear didn't. Dr. Patricia Reeves had been meeting with the family twice a week, and slowly, painfully slowly, sometimes progress was being made. Tommy's nightmares had decreased from every night to 2 or 3 times a week. Sarah was starting to speak up more about her feelings, instead of bottling everything inside. Michael had stopped constantly checking over his shoulder, though he still positioned himself protectively near his younger siblings out of habit. The healing wasn't linear. There were good days and terrible days, moments of breakthrough followed by setbacks that left everyone exhausted. But the trajectory was upward, and that was what mattered. Robert had learned in therapy that trauma recovery looked less like a straight line and more like a spiral staircase. You kept circling back to the same issues, but from a higher vantage point, each time with more tools and understanding to process them. It was frustrating and beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. This slow emergence from the darkness, Margaret had trapped them in. If you've ever watched someone you love slowly come back to life after being beaten down, you know that feeling of cautious joy mixed with protective fear, hoping they'll keep healing while terrified something might knock them back down again. Robert had kept his promise about restructuring his work life, and his business partners had been surprisingly supportive. He now worked from home 3 days a week, went into the office for critical meetings only, and had handed off several major projects to younger associates who were hungry to prove themselves. His income had taken a hit, but his family had gained everything. He was there for breakfast every morning, making pancakes or scrambled eggs while the kids got ready for school. He drove them to school himself instead of having a driver do it, using the car ride to check in on how they were feeling, what they were worried about, what they were excited about. He attended every parent-teacher conference, every school play rehearsal, every soccer practice. The teachers had noticed the change in the children. They were more engaged, more confident, more willing to participate. One teacher had pulled Robert aside and said, "I don't know what shifted in your home, Mr. Harrison, but whatever it is, keep doing it. These kids are blossoming." Robert had to excuse himself to cry in his car after that conversation because it proved that presence mattered. That showing up consistently could actually undo some of the damage his absence had enabled. Dana had become more than a housekeeper. She was family now, a beloved aunt figure who the children ran to with their joys and sorrows. Robert had given her a significant raise and reduced her working hours. But she chose to stay the same schedule because, as she put it, "These children are my children now too, and you don't clock out on family." She taught them to cook traditional recipes from her Mexican heritage, filling the kitchen with the smells of homemade tortillas, pozole, and tres leches cake. She told them stories about her own childhood, about resilience and survival, about how her grandmother used to say, "The la verdad siempre gana," the truth always wins. The children absorbed these lessons like plants absorbing sunlight, learning that other people had survived hard things too, that trauma didn't have to define your entire story. One afternoon, Sarah had asked Anna, How did you stay brave when Margaret was being mean, and you didn't know if anyone would believe you? Anna had thought carefully before answering. I wasn't brave every day, Mia. Some days I was terrified. But I knew that staying silent would hurt you more than speaking up might hurt me. Sometimes courage isn't about not being scared. It is about doing the right thing, even when you are scared. The legal proceedings against Margaret were moving forward, though slower than Robert would have liked. She'd been released on bail after her initial arrest, but the restraining order remained in effect, and her attorney was pushing for a plea deal to avoid trial. Robert's lawyer, James Mitchell, kept him updated on every development. She is trying to spin this as a case of difficult stepmother relationships rather than abuse, James explained during one of their weekly calls. Her lawyer is arguing that discipline got out of hand, but there was no malicious intent. It's a common defense strategy in these cases. Robert felt his anger flare. She locked a 6-year-old in the dark, knowing he was terrified. She told my daughter her dead mother was ashamed of her. She systematically isolated and psychologically tortured 3 children for 2 years. That's not discipline gone wrong. That's calculated cruelty. James nodded sympathetically. I agree completely, Robert. And the evidence supports your view. The videos, the medical records, the testimony, it all paints a clear picture of intentional abuse, not overzealous parenting. The prosecutor is pushing for jail time, not just probation. But you need to prepare yourself and the children for the possibility that she might get a lighter sentence than we like. The justice system doesn't always deliver perfect outcomes. The thought of Margaret walking free with just a slap on the wrist made Robert's blood boil, but he learned in therapy that he couldn't control the legal system. He could only control his response to it. Whatever happens in court, he told James, my priority is making sure she can never access my children again. That's non-negotiable. Understood, James replied. We're pushing for termination of all parental rights. She never legally adopted them, which actually works in our favor. As a step-parent without adoption, her rights are much more limited. With the restraining order and the criminal charges, we should be able to ensure she has 0 legal access going forward. That gave Robert some measure of comfort. Margaret's punishment in the criminal justice system was important, but protecting his children from any future contact with her was paramount. The shadows she'd cast over their lives were slowly lifting, and he'd be damned if he let her darken their doorway ever again. Meanwhile, life continued its slow but steady march toward normal. The children started having friends over again, something Margaret had forbidden, claiming their friends were bad influences from inferior families. The house filled with the sounds of children playing, laughing, making messes that didn't result in punishment. Tommy joined a soccer league and scored his first goal, running to Robert on the sidelines with pure joy on his face. Sarah started taking art classes and covered the refrigerator with her drawings, each one a little brighter and more colorful than the last. Michael made the honor roll for the first time in 2 years, his grades recovering now that he wasn't operating under constant stress and sleep deprivation. One evening, about 8 weeks after Margaret's departure, something remarkable happened. The family was sitting around the newly casual dinner table. Anna had insisted they eat together nightly as a family ritual. When Tommy suddenly said, "I'm happy," it was such a simple statement, delivered so matter-of-factly, that at first no one reacted. Then Sarah echoed, "Me too." "I'm happy too," Michael smiled, a real genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Yeah, this feels good. Like we're actually a family." Robert felt tears spring to his eyes again. He'd cried more in the past 2 months than in his entire adult life, and had to take a moment before he could speak. "I'm happy too," he finally managed. "So grateful for you 3, for Anna, for this second chance we've been given." Anna raised her glass of water. "To second chances. To truth. To family." They all clinked glasses water for the kids, wine for the adults, and in that moment, Robert realized something profound. They were going to be okay. Not perfect, not unmarked by what they'd been through, but okay. Healed enough to move forward. Strong enough to face whatever came next. The truth had freed them from Margaret's lies, and love was slowly but surely repairing what cruelty had broken. That night, after the children were asleep in their own beds now, secure enough to sleep independently most nights, Robert sat in his study and wrote a letter he never intended to send. It was addressed to his late wife, the children's mother, and it poured out everything he'd been carrying. His guilt for failing to protect their children after she died, his rage at Margaret for exploiting his vulnerability and their grief, his fear that he'd waited too long to save them, his hope that they were finally on the path to healing. "I'm sorry I let you down," he wrote. "I'm sorry I trusted the wrong person, and our babies paid the price for my blindness. But I promise you, I swear on everything I hold sacred, that I will never fail them again. I will be present. I will be vigilant. I will be the father they deserve, the father you always believed I could be. Watch over us as we heal. Guide us as we rebuild. And know that every day I'm teaching our children that the truth always wins over the shadows, that love is stronger than fear, and that family, real family, shows up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." He folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and tucked it away in his desk drawer, alongside the wedding photos and other mementos of his first marriage. It felt like closure somehow, like finally being honest about his failures, while also committing fully to doing better. The truth had won its battle against Margaret's shadows, but the war for healing and wholeness was ongoing. And Robert Harrison, once a distant father consumed by work, was now fully enlisted as a warrior in that war, armed with presence, fortified by love, and determined that his children would not just survive their trauma, but eventually thrive beyond it. The home they were building together wasn't the one he imagined when he first married Margaret, but it was infinitely better, authentic, honest, filled with real love instead of performed perfection. And every day, brick by brick, moment by moment, they were constructing something beautiful from the rubble of what Margaret had tried to destroy. If this journey of healing and restoration resonates with you, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what part of this story touched you most. Your engagement helps more people find these important messages about truth, family, and resilience. 1 year had passed since the day Robert Harrison discovered the truth about Margaret, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The mansion on Maple Grove Drive no longer felt like a museum or a prison. It felt alive, filled with the chaotic, beautiful noise of a real family actually living. On this particular Saturday morning, the kitchen was a disaster zone in the best possible way. Flour dusted across the counters, eggshells scattered near the sink, and 3 children covered in pancake batter, arguing cheerfully about whose turn it was to flip. Robert stood at the stove wearing an apron that said, "World's Best Dad, a Father's Day gift from Tommy," supervising the controlled chaos with a smile that had become his default expression. Anna sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee and laughing at their antics. No longer an employee, but a beloved grandmother figure who earned her place in this family through loyalty and courage. This was healing made visible, not the absence of scars, but the presence of joy despite them. Michael, now 13 and shooting up like a weed, had become the family's unofficial comedian. "Dad, I think Sarah's pancake is developing sentience," he announced, pointing at a particularly lumpy creation sizzling on the griddle. "Should we name it before we eat it, or is that too dark?" Sarah, now 10 and infinitely more confident than the withdrawn child she'd been a year ago, stuck her tongue out at her brother. "At least mine doesn't look like a map of a country that doesn't exist, Michael. What is that supposed to be? Abstract art?" Robert intervened before the banter could escalate into a flour fight, which had happened twice already this month. "All pancakes are beautiful," he declared with mock solemnity. We don't discriminate based on shape in this household. Tommy, now 7 and the family's resident optimist, piped up. Mine looks like a dinosaur. See the tail? It looked absolutely nothing like a dinosaur, but everyone agreed enthusiastically anyway, because that's what families do. They support each other as pancake-related delusions. Have you ever witnessed someone bloom into who they were always meant to be? Once the weight crushing them was finally lifted? That's what Robert saw every day in his children, the gradual emergence of their true selves, vibrant and unafraid. Dr. Reeves had recently scaled back their therapy sessions to once a month, declaring that the family had done exceptional work in processing their trauma. You've built a foundation of trust and communication that will serve you for the rest of your lives, she told them during their last session. There will still be hard days, moments when old triggers resurface, but you now have the tools to handle them together. And she'd been right. There were still hard days. Tommy occasionally still had nightmares, though they were less frequent and less intense. Sarah sometimes spiraled into anxiety when faced with authority figures, fearing punishment for normal childhood mistakes. Michael carried a protective instinct toward his siblings that bordered on hypervigilance. But these were manageable challenges now, not all-consuming terrors. The shadows hadn't disappeared entirely, but they'd been pushed to the edges where they belonged, no longer allowed to dictate how this family lived and loved. Robert had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about not letting the past erase the future. The legal proceedings had finally concluded 3 months ago. Margaret had accepted a plea deal, 18 months in county jail, 5 years probation, mandatory anger management and psychological counseling, permanent termination of any parental rights or claims to the children, and a restraining order that would remain in effect indefinitely. It wasn't as much jail time as Robert would have liked, but James Mitchell had explained that the system often went lighter on first-time offenders, especially in cases without severe physical injury. The important thing, James had said, is that she can never legally access your children again. The restraining order alone carries serious consequences if violated, and her criminal record will follow her forever if she ever tries to work with children or vulnerable populations again. This will come up. Robert had to accept that justice, like healing, was imperfect. But Margaret was out of their lives permanently, and that was what mattered most. The truth had exposed her. The legal system had punished her, and now they could move forward without looking over their shoulders. Life had settled into a beautiful routine. Robert's business was actually thriving, despite his reduced hours turned out that working smarter rather than longer was a real strategy, not just a platitude. He'd promoted several talented associates who'd stepped up brilliantly, and the company was exploring new markets with fresh energy. But more importantly, Robert was present for the moments that mattered. Michael making the basketball team and scoring the winning basket in their championship game. Sarah's art being selected for a citywide student exhibition. Tommy learning to ride a bike without training wheels and only crashing into the bushes twice. These were the memories being built now, the foundation of a childhood that would be defined not by what Margaret had done to them, but by what they'd overcome together and who they'd become in the aftermath. Anna often said, La verdad ganó. The truth won, and she was right. The truth had won, and on the other side of that victory was a life worth living. The children's school had become aware of what they'd endured. Robert had been transparent with the principal and teachers, wanting them to understand context if behavioral issues arose, and the response had been overwhelmingly supportive. The school counselor checked in with each child regularly. Teachers offered extra patience during difficult transitions. The principal had even implemented a new school-wide program about recognizing and reporting abuse, inspired partly by the Harrison family's story. Your children has courage in surviving, and your courage in acting once you knew the truth. That's going to help other families, the principal had told Robert during a parent conference. We're training our staff to look for warning signs we might have missed before. Robert had mixed feelings about their trauma becoming a cautionary tale, but if it prevented even one other child from suffering in silence, then perhaps some good could come from the pain they'd endured. The shadows that had nearly destroyed his family might now cast light for others still trapped in darkness. Anna had recently shared something with Robert that crystallized how far they'd all come. "You know, Mr. Harrison, Robert," he corrected gently. They'd been through too much together for formality. "Robert," she amended with a smile. "A year ago, this house was silent. Not peaceful silent, but fearful silent. The kind of quiet that comes when people are afraid to breathe too loud. Now," she gestured around the chaotic kitchen where the children were still debating pancake aesthetics. "Now it's loud and messy and full of life. That's what victory sounds like, not silence, but joy that isn't afraid to make noise." Robert had never thought about it that way, but she was absolutely right. The house used to feel like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next explosion from Margaret. Now they breathed freely, laughed loudly, lived fully. The transformation wasn't just in the redecorated rooms or the absence of locked doors. It was in the very atmosphere of the home, which had shifted from fear to love as its dominant emotion. That evening, after a day spent at the park, where Tommy's dinosaur pancake was commemorated with a picnic, the family gathered in the living room for their weekly grateful circle, a tradition Dr. Reeves had suggested and they'd maintained even after therapy scaled back. Each person shared one thing they were grateful for that week. Tommy went first. "I'm grateful for my new soccer cleats, and that Dad came to my game even though it rained." Sarah followed. "I'm grateful that my art teacher said my painting showed exceptional emotional depth, and I didn't even have to ask what that meant, because it sounded good." Michael, trying to play it cool but failing. "I'm grateful that Dad taught me how to change a tire this week and trusted me to do it without hovering. Made me feel grown up," Anna shared. "I'm grateful for this family that adopted me, even though I'm supposed to be the employee. You've given my life more meaning than you know." Finally, Robert, "I'm grateful that we're all here together, healthy and healing. Grateful for second chances. Grateful that truth is stronger than lies, and love is stronger than fear." It was a simple ritual, but it kept them connected, kept them focused on progress rather than pain, kept them aware that even in difficulty, there were always things worth celebrating. As the children headed upstairs to get ready for bed still, a process that required reminders and negotiations, because some things never changed, Robert sat with Anna in companionable silence. "We made it," he said softly, "through the worst of it." "We actually made it," Anna nodded. "You made it because you faced the truth when it would have been easier to look away. Because you chose your children over your pride, healing over comfort, presence over convenience. That's not luck, Mr. Robert. That's character." Robert felt the weight of that affirmation settle over him like a blessing. He'd failed his children once by not seeing, by not being present, by trusting the wrong person, but he hadn't failed them in the end. When it mattered most, he'd shown up, fought for them, and stayed the course through the messy, painful process of healing. That didn't erase his earlier mistakes, but it proved that mistakes don't have to be the end of the story. They can be the beginning of redemption. If you believe in the power of redemption and second chances, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell, because stories like this remind us that it is never too late to choose love, truth, and courage over fear. 2 years after Margaret's arrest, on a crisp autumn evening when the leaves blazed gold and crimson outside the windows, the Harrison family gathered around their dinner table for a celebration that none of them had imagined possible during those dark days. Tommy had just turned 8, and his birthday party earlier that day had been everything a childless birthday should be: chaotic, loud, filled with friends and cake and presents and zero fear. But now, after the guests had left and the house had settled into its comfortable evening rhythm, Something more meaningful was about to happen. Robert had asked each of his children to prepare something for tonight, a reflection on the journey they'd taken together, the lessons they'd learned, and the people they'd become. It was ambitious for kids their ages, but these weren't ordinary children anymore. They'd been through fire and emerged not just survivors, but warriors who understood things about resilience, truth, and love that most adults never grasp. Tonight was about honoring that growth and looking forward to the future they were building together. Michael, now 14 and showing early signs of the man he'd become, stood first. He'd written something on his phone, which he cleared his throat and read aloud. 2 years ago, I thought being strong meant protecting people with my body standing between my brother and sister and danger. I thought I had to be the shield. But Dad taught me that real strength is being vulnerable enough to ask for help, honest enough to admit when you're scared, and brave enough to trust that people who love you will show up. I'm grateful I don't have to be the shield anymore. I can just be the brother. His voice cracked on the last word, and Sarah immediately reached over to squeeze his hand. Robert felt tears pricking his eyes again. He'd long since given up trying to maintain the stoic masculinity he'd once prided himself on. Emotions weren't weakness. He'd learned. They were proof that you were alive and present and connected to people who mattered. Have you ever watched someone transform from a scared, defensive child into a confident young person who understands their own worth? That's witnessing the power of consistent love and safety to reshape a human soul. Sarah went next, pulling out a sketchbook filled with drawings she'd made over the past 2 years. I drew my feelings because sometimes words weren't enough, she explained, flipping through pages that documented her journey in visual form. Early drawings were dark, literally dark, with heavy black lines and shadowy figures looming large. But as the pages progressed, light began appearing, first as small cracks in the darkness, then as beams breaking through, finally as entire pages filled with bright colors and smiling figures. This is us now, she said, showing her most recent drawing. Their family around the dinner table, Anna included, everyone laughing. I'm grateful that I learned darkness doesn't to last forever if you be brave enough to let light in. And I'm grateful Dad was brave enough to see the truth, even when it hurt. She closed the sketchbook and added quietly, and I'm grateful that Margaret's lies didn't win. The truth did. Anna always said the truth wins, and she was right. Robert couldn't speak, too overcome with emotion, so he just pulled Sarah into a fierce hug while she giggled and complained that he was squishing her drawing. Tommy, the baby of the family and the one who'd been most vulnerable during Margaret's reign of terror, approached his reflection with characteristic directness. I used to be scared all the time, he announced matter-of-factly. Scared of the dark, scared of being alone, scared I did something wrong and didn't know what. But I'm not scared anymore, not like that. I know Daddy won't let bad things happen, and if bad things do happen anyway, we'll fight them together. He paused, thinking hard. Anna says that surviving hard things makes you strong, like how trees that survive storms have deeper roots. I think we have deep roots now. The wisdom coming from an 8-year-old, Esmouth was simultaneously heartbreaking and beautiful heartbreaking that he had to learn it so young, beautiful that he'd learned it at all. Robert pulled Tommy onto his lap, kissing the top of his head, marveling at the resilient, insightful little person his youngest son was becoming. The shadows that had once terrified Tommy had lost their power, not because they disappeared, but because Tommy had learned he was stronger than they were. Anna dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, then shared her own reflection. When I first came to work in this house, I was just looking for a job to pay bills. But God had bigger plans. He put me here to witness suffering I couldn't ignore, and gave me the courage to document it even when I was terrified. I'm grateful that Mr. Robert, she corrected with a small smile, believed me when I showed him the truth. Many men in his position would have protected their pride, their marriage, their reputation. He protected his children instead. That's character. That's love. And I'm grateful to have seen love win over evil, truth win over lies, and light win over darkness. Lia verdad siempre gana, the truth always wins. I've known this in my head my whole life, but this family taught me to know it in my heart. She raised her glass. To truth, to courage, to family blood, and chosen both. They all clinked glasses, even Tommy with his juice box, and Robert felt the weight of gratitude so heavy he could barely breathe under it. Finally, it was Robert's turn. He'd prepared remarks, but found them inadequate now, so he spoke from the heart instead. 2 years ago, I was a successful businessman and a failing father. I had all the money anyone could want, and none of the things that actually mattered. I was blind to my own children's suffering, because I'd convinced myself that providing financially was the same as being present. Margaret exploited that blindness, used my absence and my grief over losing your mother to create a kingdom of cruelty right under my nose. He paused, collecting himself. I can't undo those 2 years. I can't erase the pain you endured or the scars you carry. But I can promise you, I can swear to you, that I will spend the rest of my life being present, being vigilant, being the father you deserve. Not a perfect father, because perfection is a lie, but a present father, an honest father, a father who chooses you every single day over money and status and convenience. His voice broke, but he pushed through. The truth about wealth is that it has nothing to do with bank accounts. True wealth is sitting around this table with people who love you, who've seen you at your worst, and chosen to stay, who've survived darkness together and come out holding hands on the other side. Michael spoke up, his young voice carrying surprising authority. Dad, you made a mistake trusting Margaret, but you also fixed it the moment you knew. That's what matters, not that you never mess up, but that you own it and do better. You taught us that. The grace in his son's words nearly undid Robert completely. These children, who had every right to hold grudges and harbor resentment, had instead chosen forgiveness and forward motion. That was the true miracle, not just that they'd survived, but that they'd survived without becoming bitter or closed off. The shadows hadn't poisoned them permanently. The light had been stronger. Sarah added, "Plus, you make really good pancakes now, so that helps." The moment of levity was perfect, breaking the emotional tension with laughter that rang through the house like bells. Anna shook her head, smiling. Only this family could go from deep emotional processing to pancake appreciation in 30 seconds. Tommy declared, "Pancakes are emotional." And everyone lost it completely, laughing until their sides hurt. The kind of laughter that only comes when you reach truly comfortable and safe with the people around you. As the evening wound down and the children reluctantly headed upstairs, Tommy still negotiating for just 5 more minutes. Like bedtimes were optional, Robert and Anna sat together in the peaceful aftermath. "You know what Margaret never understood?" Anna said thoughtfully. "Money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy what this family has now. It can't buy the bond forged in surviving something terrible together. It can't buy the trust that comes from showing up consistently. It can't buy the love that chooses someone every day, not because you have to, but because you want to." Robert nodded, understanding, finally really understanding what Anna meant. He'd spent the first 45 years of his life chasing financial success, believing that wealth would solve problems and create happiness. But sitting here now, in a house full of people who loved each other authentically, he realized he'd been chasing the wrong thing all along. The real wealth wasn't he in his investment portfolio or his mansion. It was in Michael's terrible jokes, Sarah's artwork covering the refrigerator, Tommy's dinosaur pancake stories, and Anna's quiet wisdom that had saved them all. "Do you think they'll be okay?" Robert asked, the question he returned to often, especially late at night when doubts crept in. "Long term, I mean, will the trauma define them?" Anna considered carefully before answering. I think the trauma will be part of their story, but it won't be the whole story. They'll have setbacks. Life will trigger old fears sometimes, but they have tools now. They have honesty and communication, and a father who shows up. Most importantly, they have proof that darkness doesn't last forever, that truth wins over lies, and that love is more powerful than fear. Those lessons will carry them through whatever comes next. She paused, then added with a smile, "Besides, anyone who can survive what they survived and still laugh about pancakes is going to be just fine." Robert laughed despite himself, recognizing the truth in her words. Resilience wasn't about never being hurt. It was about being hurt and choosing to heal, to grow, and find joy again anyway. His children were living proof that the human spirit, especially the spirit of children loved and supported properly, was remarkably resilient. The shadows had touched them, but hadn't consumed them. The truth had freed them, and love was healing them. That was the real victory, not the absence of pain, but the presence of healing in spite of it. If this story of truth triumphing over darkness moved your heart, do me a favor and share this video with someone who needs to hear that healing is possible, because sometimes sharing hope is the most powerful thing we can do for each other. 5 years had passed since the day Robert Harrison walked through his front door and discovered the truth that shattered his world and saved his children. Michael was now 17, preparing for college applications and driving his siblings crazy with his newfound obsession with philosophy and asking profound questions at breakfast. Sarah was 13, her room covered wall-to-wall with artwork that had won regional competitions and caught the attention of a prestigious arts program. Tommy was 10, still the family optimist, captain of his soccer team and self-appointed keeper of family traditions like pancake Saturdays and grateful circles. Anna, now in her 60s, had officially retired from housekeeping, but came to family dinners weekly because, as she insisted, "You can't get rid of me that easily. I'm your abuela now, like it or not." And Robert Harrison, now 51 years old with more gray hair but infinitely more wisdom, had learned the hardest and most important lesson of his life. That true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in moments like these ordinary, beautiful, absolutely priceless moments with people who loved each other authentically. The house on Maple Grove Drive had changed yet again. Michael's room was covered with college brochures and band posters. Sarah had converted the garage into an art studio where she spent hours painting. Tommy's room looked like a sporting goods store had exploded in it. But the biggest change was in the atmosphere. The house breathed differently now, exhaled peace and inhaled laughter, a living organism that had healed from infection and emerged stronger. Robert worked from home most days now, having restructured his entire business around the principle that no amount of money was worth missing his children's lives. His company had thrived under this new leadership style. Turned out that when you prioritized people over profits, both ended up doing better. His partners had initially thought he was crazy, but 5 years later, they'd adopted similar approaches in their own lives. Robert Harrison had accidentally become a thought leader on work-life balance in business circles, though he always insisted he wasn't teaching anything revolutionary, just relearning what should have been obvious all along, that humans matter more than margins, that presence matters more than productivity, and that the truth about success is that it means nothing if you're successful and alone. Have you ever realized that the hardest lessons often carry the greatest gifts? That what breaks you open can also break you free if you're willing to do the work of healing and growth? Margaret's name was rarely spoken anymore, not because it was forbidden, but because she'd become irrelevant, a cautionary tale, a chapter in their history that informed their present but didn't define it. She'd served her 18-month sentence and disappeared from their lives completely, the restraining order ensuring she remained a distant memory rather than a present threat. Robert had heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to another state, married again. He felt a flash of pity for whoever that poor soul was, and was presumably building a new life far away from the wreckage of the old one. The children occasionally mentioned her in therapy, less as a monster and more as a person who'd done monstrous things, which Dr. Reeves said was a sign of healthy perspective. They'd learned to hold two truths simultaneously, that Margaret had hurt them terribly, and that her actions didn't have the power to destroy them. The shadow she'd cast had been real, but the light they'd found together was more real, more powerful, more lasting. Truth had won. It always did, eventually, if you were brave enough to face it and patient enough to let it work. On this particular evening, the family gathered for what would be one of their last dinners all together. For a while, Michael would be leaving for college in 3 months, a reality that made everyone simultaneously proud and melancholy. Robert had made his now famous lasagna. Anna had taught him to cook properly over the years, transforming him from guy who burns water to actually decent home chef. A conversation flowed easily, comfortably, touching on everything from Michael's college essay about resilience to Sarah's upcoming art show to Tommy's indignation that his math teacher didn't appreciate his creative approach to word problems. This was family, messy, loud, imperfect, and absolutely sacred. In the middle of dinner, Sarah suddenly asked a question that stopped everyone mid-bite. "Dad, do you ever regret marrying Margaret?" The silence was heavy for a moment. It was the kind of question that deserved honesty, not platitudes. Robert put down his fork and thought carefully before answering. "I regret what happened to you three. I regret not being present enough to see what was happening. I regret the pain you endured. But do I regret the experience itself? No, because it taught me what actually matters. It burned away everything false in my life and left only what was real. It made me the father I should have been from the beginning. So I hate what you went through, but I'm grateful for what we became because of it." Michael nodded slowly, processing. "That's like what my philosophy teacher says, that sometimes the worst experiences carry the most important lessons. That suffering can be redemptive if we let it transform us instead of destroy us." Robert smiled at his eldest son, marveling at the thoughtful young man he'd become. Exactly. Margaret was the darkness that taught us to value light. She was the lie that taught us to treasure truth. She was the absence of love that taught us what real love looks like. Anna added softly, "La verdad siempre vence las sombras." The truth always conquers the shadows. I've been saying this for 5 years, and it's still true. Will always be true. Tommy, who'd been unusually quiet, spoke up. "I barely remember her now. Like, I remember being scared, but I don't really remember her face or her voice anymore. Is that weird?" Dr. Reeves had warned them this might happen, that as the children healed and built new, positive memories, the traumatic ones would naturally fade in prominence, become less vivid. It was the brain's gift, a natural protective mechanism. "That's not weird at all, buddy," Robert assured him. "That's healing. You're making so many happy memories now that they're crowding out the bad ones. That's exactly what's supposed to happen." Sarah pushed her lasagna around her plate thoughtfully. "I think about her sometimes. Wonder if she ever thinks about us, ever feels sorry for what she did." Robert considered how to answer that. "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope she does, because remorse means growth, and I'd like to think people are capable of change. But honestly, whether she feels sorry or not doesn't matter to our story anymore. We're not waiting for her apology or her acknowledgement to move forward. We moved forward without it. That is the power you have. You get to write the rest of your story regardless of what she does with hers." It was a lesson he'd learned in his own therapy. You can't control other people as growth or remorse. You can only control your own healing. Waiting for Margaret to validate their pain or acknowledge her wrongdoing would have meant giving her power over their recovery, and they'd collectively decided she'd had enough power over their lives. The truth had exposed her lies. Justice had delivered its verdict, and now they were free to heal without needing anything more from her. That was the final victory, not needing the villain to repent in order to move forward. The truth had been enough. Their love for each other had been enough. They were enough. As dinner wound down and the children scattered to their various activities, Michael to study for finals, Sarah to work on a painting Tommy to a video call with friends, Robert and Anna found themselves alone in the kitchen, a familiar scene that had played out hundreds of times over the years. 5 years, Anna said wonderingly. Sometimes feels like yesterday. Sometimes feels like another lifetime. Robert nodded, loading the dishwasher. Both are true somehow. The trauma feels distant, but the lessons feel immediate. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Anna confirmed. That's what it means to integrate suffering. You don't forget it, but you stop living in it. You take the wisdom it taught you and leave the pain behind. She paused, then added, You know what I'm most proud of? Not that you saved them from Margaret. You did, and that matters. But what I'm most proud of is that you saved yourself too. You were drowning in work and denial and grief, using business success to avoid facing the emptiness your wife's death left. Margaret was a symptom of that avoidance. But you didn't just remove the symptom, you healed the underlying wound. You became present. You dealt with your grief. You chose connection over distraction. That's transformation, not just rescue. Robert felt the weight of her words settle over him like a benediction. She was right. His journey had been about more than protecting his children from abuse. It had been about becoming the man and father he was always supposed to be, the person his late wife had believed he could be. He'd spent the first half of his life accumulating wealth and status, building an impressive resume, while his actual life, the part that mattered, slowly crumbled. Margaret had been the crisis that forced him to face himself, to tear down everything false and rebuild on a foundation of truth. It had been agonizing and necessary, and ultimately redemptive. He'd lost a marriage, but gained a real relationship with his children. He'd lost his illusions, but gained authentic purpose. He'd lost his comfortable blindness, but gained the ability to see clearly, to value truly, to love honestly. And now, standing in his kitchen with Anna beside him, and his children thriving upstairs, Robert Harrison finally understood what success actually looked like. It looked like this: ordinary, messy, beautiful, real. If you've made it to the end of this journey with us, you understand that truth is always worth fighting for, that love always wins over fear, and that it's never too late to choose courage over comfort. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Robert stood in the hallway outside his children's rooms, doors open now, always open, a permanent symbol of freedom and safety. He could hear Michael's music playing softly, see the light from Sarah's bedside lamp, where she was probably still sketching, hear Tommy's gentle snoring. These sounds, the sounds of children safe and content and free to simply exist, were the symphony of victory, the music of truth triumphant over lies, of light dispersing shadows, of love conquering fear. He thought about the man he'd been 5 years ago, successful but absent, wealthy but poor in the ways that mattered, proud but blind. That man would barely recognize the person he'd become more present, more vulnerable, infinitely more aware of what actually constituted a life well lived. The journey from there to here had been brutal and necessary, paid for with tears and truth and the courage to face uncomfortable realities. But standing here now, listening to his children breathe peacefully in their rooms, Robert knew with absolute certainty that every painful step had been worth it. The truth had won. Not easily, not quickly, but completely. The shadows Margaret had cast over his family had been burned away by the light of honesty, courage, and persistent love. And the lesson, the one he'd carry for the rest of his life and teach to anyone who listen, was simple but profound, that no amount of money, status, or success meant anything if the people you loved were suffering in silence. That presence was more valuable than presence, that truth was more important than comfort, And that courage looked like facing hard realities instead of hiding from them. These lessons had cost him everything he thought mattered and given him back everything that actually did. His children were healing, thriving, becoming remarkable humans who understood that darkness could be survived and truth was worth fighting for. And Robert Harrison, once a businessman who measured worth in dollars, now measured it in moments like these quiet, ordinary, absolutely priceless moments when everyone he loved was safe and whole and free to simply be. That was true wealth. That was real success. That was the victory that mattered. Before you go, I want to ask you one thing. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that truth and love can overcome even the darkest circumstances, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who needs hope, and leave a comment telling me where you re-watching from and what part of this journey resonated most with you. Because your story matters too, and together we can remind each other that healing is always possible when we choose truth over shadows.